Welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast, where we learn how to integrate faith into the work that we do. Don't conform to the world's way of doing business. Transform by doing business God's way. Here's our host, my husband, author, speaker, teacher, encourager, and stewardship coach, Jason Davis.
What's going on, everybody? What is going on? My name is Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify, and welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast, where we talk about how we integrate faith into the work that we do and how we live out our faith in the marketplace. Last episode, we just celebrated our 50th episode. Thank you to all the listeners. Thank you to Positive Power Christian Media for all the support. It's like I told you last week, folks, we are just getting started. And as we approach the next milestone of 75 and then 100 episodes, you got to have the one. So as we go from episode 50 to episode 51, let me introduce someone to you who is one of my favorite people. We always have enlightening conversations when we have coffee. But before I bring her on, let me introduce her to you. Nicole Miller is a licensed clinical mental health therapist located in Atlanta, Georgia. Nicole is a serial entrepreneur and is the proud owner of a private psychotherapy practice, Inner Edge Counseling LLC, and an online life coaching practice, Nicole M. Coaching LLC. She is passionate about helping all her clients achieve well-being and create fulfilling and satisfying lives and relationships. When not working with clients, Nicole is passionate about traveling and spending quality time with her family and fiance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast, Miss Nicole Miller. What's going on, Nicole?
Hey, Jason. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. You know, Nicole, it's so funny. I can recall when we had the conversation and I said, Nicole, we got to get you on the podcast. And we hadn't seen each other in a little bit. And we know, everyone was dealing with the pandemic and whatnot. But just seeing you in person that day we sat down, we said, you know what? I got to have her on. I've got to. And so, Nicole, it's so awesome to have you here on the show.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and on the heels of your 50th episode, too. That's so exciting.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Nicole, we know that there's a lot of things in your bio, but we know that where you are right now is not where you were. So give us just an overview of your professional background and how you turned into the coach, therapist, counselor, serial entrepreneur. How did you get here?
Great question. So I was actually thinking about this before I came on because I knew you were going to ask me questions like this. And what struck me was I feel like I've lived many lives professionally before getting to the place that I am now, and I think that many of us can say that ultimately. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a backstory, I come from a family of serial entrepreneurs. My grandmother, on my mom's side, she was an entrepreneur, one of the only female entrepreneurs in their town. And then my parents were also entrepreneurs, owned their own business. So I come by entrepreneurship very, very honestly. I can definitely say it is my calling. I can't imagine doing anything else. But before, becoming a psychotherapist and now being a coach as well, I started my quote unquote professional career, if you will, in high school, working as a figure skating coach, which is a super fun fact. I was a competitive figure skater for 12 years and I coached for 8 years. So that was a really fun time in my life. And really, I think what kind of launched, the helping profession or the helping professional in me, ultimately serving my students who ranged from anywhere from like 5 years old up to 65. I got to see a wide breadth and depth of clientele. And then from there, I went off to college. I was still coaching, figure skating. grad school, I still coach figure skating, which is honestly what got me through financially in grad school. So I'm super blessed and grateful for that. And then, during graduate school, I went on to do internships, and I worked in the church a lot doing what's called divorce care for kids. So I was kind of a peer support, if you will, for children, adolescents who were navigating divorce between their parents. And so that was really rewarding and fulfilling, and really just encouraging in my journey to become a professional counselor. So since then, obviously, I've launched my own private practice, Inner Edge Counseling, as a psychotherapist. And then most recently, I have a real estate holding company, which I know you were excited about.
Yes, we will talk about that for sure.
Yeah, we can talk about that. But that also is geared more towards the helping professions as well, supporting other clinicians and therapists and helping professionals in their journey in entrepreneurship. And then finally, I just launched, as if those two businesses weren't enough, my coaching practice at the very beginning of this year. So, like I said, I've lived many lives professionally.
Listen, folks, did you just hear the breakdown of what Nicole is doing? And then, hold on, Nicole, I have to go back. Coaching figure skating from high school?
Yeah.
I see, folks, this is why I like Nicole, because there's always an extra detail that we hadn't discussed before. So you're like getting my real-time reaction to what? Really, Nicole? I did not know that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
I was listening to you say that, my goodness. Go ahead. My God.
Yeah, no, I skated, like I said, competitively for 12 years, probably actually a little bit longer. I'm probably underestimating it. But yeah, I started when I was 11, which is technically, if anyone's familiar with figure skating, a very late bloomer to the sport. Progressed through all of the different levels. There's about, we'll say 16, I'm probably missing a couple there, but 16 tests to get you from beginner to the level that you see competitively on TV. So I passed all of those tests and was coaching while competing, and then, like I said, continued to coach through graduate school after I stopped competing. So it was fun.
Wow. So, Nicole, if I'm hearing you, and we'll unpack for the listeners too, because we're going to get into, okay, there's coaching, there's counseling, there's therapy, so we'll get to that. But what really stood out to me, Nicole, with your professional experience is you understood from a young age competition. You understood taking a person from one level of performance to their next level of performance. Also right. With your family, and shout out to all of the family businesses out there. You just never know the example that you're setting for your children. So you have a legacy, Nicole, from your family of just, watching them do it, seeing the ins and the outs. And because sometimes, Nicole, as you and I both know, entrepreneurship can be really, the sexy thing at times, if I could say that. And then at other times it's like, no, you didn't know that they were up until the wee hours of the morning. You didn't know that nobody shows unless you do the behind the scenes. Nobody does the back end thing, right? They don't know all the blood, sweat, and tears that comes with it. And so that's just wow. So that was just a few of the things that stood out in your story: competition, development. And so you got to experience, because you were doing it at such a young age. You already knew the power of coaching, and we'll get to like the professional definition, because some people are like, oh, kind of like a sports coach, right? And it's like, well, there's a little bit more to it than that. And so let's kind of go there, Nicole, because you've been given gems already and kind of leading us that way. You have Inner Edge Counseling. You have the private coaching practice. And then talk to us about the difference between what formal coaching is and its goal, and then what counseling is, and then what the goal of counseling does?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are, my definitions based on how I perceive these two fields, and I'm sure other people have different perspectives or slightly different perspectives. So I look at coaching and as being non-clinical, right? So as a therapist, as a clinical mental health professional, right, counseling is very clinical based. We're dealing with those mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, all of those intense type of things. And not to say that individuals who are in coaching may not have those things, but those are generally not the topics that we are coaching on, because they would be a more better fit for a clinical setting such as therapy. So I like to look at coaching as a non-clinical exercise in terms of my practice, in a way that helps people overcome hurdles and barriers that they would otherwise struggle to do so on their own. Whereas in the therapy realm of things, again, we're working on those clinical issues, those mental health issues. And it can take, that form too of like overcoming barriers for sure. But there's also a lot of past work that's happening. We're looking at, where did you come from? What is your modeling? What is, your family systems like? All of that good stuff. So it's perhaps a bit more of a deeper dive into the whole person, if you will.
Wow, that's a very very good description, Nicole, and that's a good way for people to kind of help remember and kind of to shape the type of help that they probably need. So thank you for breaking that down for us. Nicole, obviously we've all heard the word unprecedented, right? We had racial and social injustice at the same time, economic uncertainty, and at the same time, the big C word and with the pandemic. And we saw, Nicole, now this is data, but then there's you specifically being on the front lines, which we thank you for. Depression and anxiety reached all-time levels over these last 2.5 years. So can you talk to us about what you saw kind of in the height of the pandemic, and then maybe what you're kind of seeing now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying, but, the pandemic was very scary for all of us, brought about a ton of uncertainty in a variety of different areas, many of which you just highlighted. And so that's really, my clinic does focus on anxiety and depression. That's one of my specialties, or two of my specialties, rather. So, there were upticks in coming in just burdened with fear and uncertainty and dread and even hopelessness too for the future. Like, what is this all going to look like? A lot of times in working with clients who are anxious, we talk about the quote unquote what ifs, all of those questions. What if I lose my job? What if I get COVID? What if a loved one dies, right? All of those big kind of existential questions were coming up. And as humans, we don't generally do well with uncertainty. That shakes us to our core. So it was such a hard time for so many people to not be able to feel like they had something that they could reach towards that felt really tangible and secure, to find that sense of control and safety. And that's really one of the things that stood out to me, is just all areas of life were just turned on their head, and it didn't feel like people had a place to go to feel safe and secure.
Wow. People were and still are dealing with so much out there. So our hearts go out to everyone. If you're struggling like that, there are people like Nicole who are available to help you through that. Nicole, that brings me, you made me think about another question. As followers of Christ, sometimes there's this stigma that gets put on sometimes counseling, but definitely therapy. Can you comment on, just based on what you've seen, where do you think that comes from? And, if you have clients that are people of faith, what have they been surprised or enlightened about that maybe they weren't expecting once they actually, put aside legalism and some other things and said, you know what? Wow, I sat down with Nicole and that was better than what I expected. Just give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. Like in our society as a whole, there is such a stigma against therapy and counseling. And I do see a shift in that, which is fantastic. But there's also a stigma against therapy and counseling, unfortunately, in the church and in religious circles. And I think from what I've heard from some of, my clients or other clinicians they've worked with who are also Christians, is this idea that, Jesus has healed us. He has set us free, which he has. And I think a lot of us as Christians, put a little bit too much emphasis on, well, if he has set us free, then I'm just going to pray this anxiety away, or I'm going to pray this depression away, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with praying about your anxiety, praying about your depression, praying about anything, right? That's what the Bible encourages us to do when we're struggling with something. But sometimes we need a little bit extra support, and that's where counseling comes in. And I think so many Christians just feel shame that they need support in their mental health, right? Because we're told that we have the minds of Christ. And when we struggle so deeply with, mental health issues, it feels like there's something wrong with us, and maybe we don't have the mind of Christ. And again, that what if comes up of like, what if I'm doing this wrong? What if I'm not a good enough Christian? What if I'm not praying hard enough? And again, so burdensome, and it puts a lot of shame on us as individuals. So what I've seen in my clients who have maybe had that mentality before, who then come into counseling, is a sense generally of just a weight being lifted off of their shoulders, because they realize that I'm not there to shame them. I'm not there to tell them and confirm their what ifs, that they've been doing it all wrong, that they're not a good enough Christian, that they're not praying hard enough. It's just simply, hey, you've been doing everything that you need to do, and now we're going to add a little bit extra to get you over that line, that hump, if you will. And it's so freeing for them to know that they have those tangible tools in addition to their spiritual beliefs and their prayer lives and things like that to help them.
That's good, Nicole. And I love how you spoke to the root of the issue. Hey, yes, the Bible talks about being set free and being delivered and things like that. But like you said, what about the day-to-day ongoing support? Everybody may not have that miracle in the moment of being healed. And some people, the healing is in the process and in the journey. And so I just love how you brought some clarity and some peace to that mentality that's out there. Now, Nicole, I enjoy our conversations, and I just wanted to say this because it's in your bio. So, Nicole, you remember being at church, right? And you have the people who would sit towards the front of the church, and then you have the people who sit in the back. I don't know if you ever sat in the back pew, Nicole, but remember so this is what I'm about to ask you. This is for the people in the back, right? Okay. So when we hear the word or term psychotherapy, how is that defined? I feel like that's a nice $25 word, right? that when it's lived out and executed is life-changing. But if someone's just reading a brochure and they go, that sounds like this lady's really important, and I know she is, but what does that mean in layman's terms?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because you're right. Psychotherapy sounds like I'm really important, and it probably also sounds really scary too. I'm going to go talk to a psychotherapist. But really what it boils down to in layman's terms is a fancy word for talk therapy. So basically coming to see me, a psychotherapist, is having a conversation. That's all it is. We're just talking. we're talking maybe in a way that you wouldn't normally talk in your day-to-day life, and we're processing things in a way that you may not process in your day-to-day life typically. But it's just a conversation. And that is something, I can kind of speak to this too, like I really pride myself in my clinical work in being just like down to earth. I'm not there to prove anything. I'm not special. I'm not important. It is all about you, the client, and I'm invested in you and being real and getting to the root of your problems, however long that takes. And it's just about you, a conversation about you. And who doesn't love that?
Nicole, thank you for that, because I feel like you just set some people free. So
I hope so.
So if you're listening, folks, and you need this type of support, and you've been searching, and then you run across the word psychotherapy, you now know, hey, you're just going to sit down and have a conversation. That's what you're going to do. So like I said, Nicole, I think you just set some people free there. Instead of allowing us to be scared by the vocabulary that we see written down. So thank you for defining that for us. Nicole, you started to touch on this a little bit. Now, obviously, we know the conversations of working with a patient or client is protected, but what is the anatomy of what a session could look like? Like, how is that structured? Is there any sort of, I don't want to say pre-work, but is there anything you ask people to do coming into a session, and then there's having the session, and then is there maybe things to follow up on afterward? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and something I offer to all new clients is a phone consultation to pretty much kind of walk through that process and answer any initial questions, because, you know, like we talked about, psychotherapy is kind of a big, scary word, and generally there are questions surrounding it. So, and what I'll share with clients or potential clients on that consult call is, you know, you're going to fill out some paperwork just like you would at a normal doctor's office. It's a little bit different in the sense that it asks, you know, some questions that maybe you wouldn't normally see on intake forms. It's also going to challenge you to think a little bit about what are your goals? What outcomes do you want from this process? And sometimes clients will leave that pretty vague. Sometimes they're crystal clear. And either way is okay. You know, the goals are always something that we're working on together. It's a very collaborative process to set the goals and to discuss goal attainment ultimately. But then there's that first session. So really that's just what I call a get to know you session. And that's where I really allow the client to have pretty much free reign and tell me what they think is important about themselves that I should know in terms of what they're seeking therapy for. And then from there, you know, we decide, are we a good fit? Because just because you come and see me once doesn't mean you're locked in to therapy with me for 6 months or a year or 10 years. You're free to go at any time. So we'll determine, you know, is this a good fit? If it is, we talk about those goals. What do you want to achieve? How can I help you? Where have you been successful before? Or where do you feel like you've been unsuccessful in the past? And how can we make you or help you be more successful in those areas? And then future sessions really just focus in on those goals and being super targeted towards those outcomes that you're looking for. And those future sessions typically take two-part form. So there's a processing part, which again is just a fancy word for saying we're just talking. So you may be telling me about, you know, what's been going on. You know, if you're a client with anxiety, you may say, yeah, my anxiety was super high last week and this is why, and we'll talk about it. But then there's also the skills building piece. And this piece is so, so important to me, at least as a clinician, is that you have tangible tools to put in what I call your toolbox, so that the next time you're experiencing whatever symptoms typically come up for you, you know exactly what tool to reach for in your toolbox to manage that symptom and be successful and find resiliency in that moment. So basically it's a wash, rinse, repeat process of we talk about your goals, how you're working towards them, what's working, what's not working, and we just add and take away tools from your toolbox as needed.
See, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't she sound like somebody you just want to sit down and talk to? That's what she sounds like. And Nicole, I appreciate you because, now I'm not in the industry, right? But I'm just saying from what I know about you, it's like, man, just from an industry perspective, shouldn't that be how everybody everybody may have their style or their different techniques, but shouldn't it be a normal thing like, hey, we're just going to sit down. This isn't something big and scary. I just, as I hear you explaining that, for the listeners, I hope you're taking in the way that Nicole is breaking this down, because she's not the only one, but she is the one that we're talking to. So I hope people can feel encouraged and empowered, if they need to sit down and talk to someone like you, Nicole. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Nicole, I've been waiting a long time for this one. So I remember when we were sitting down and you were talking about the practice and how things were going and family, and then you hit me with this real estate thing. And I said, now, wait a minute. Counselor, coach. So, folks, when I tell you that she's a serial entrepreneur, and not that it's just in her bio, like this woman lives it. So, Nicole, bring us up to speed on how in the world, and for the people who are multi-passionates, or you feel like, hey, I kind of feel a little serial entrepreneur in me too. Maybe I'm that way. But Nicole, how does counseling and therapy and coaching meet real estate?
Well, that's a fun story. So to kind of bring it full circle, to bring it really full circle, my parents were always super interested in real estate. It's not ever something that they fleshed out and actually went out and did, but I remember as a kid we would drive around and look at houses or different commercial properties, and I would hear my parents like brainstorm about, oh, we could do this with it and we could paint it this color. So maybe that's where I got kind of the real estate itch. I don't really know. But that's where my real estate, quote unquote, experience or exposure, I guess is actually a better word, came from. But the way in which this other business, which is called Buckhead Counseling and Wellness, came to be is just out of necessity, honestly. So, when I first started my practice and I was an associate licensed counselor, I was working at an office space in Buckhead. I was renting just, 1 or 2 days a week. And by the time 2018, 2019, and right into 2020 came around, my practice had grown so much that I had outgrown the capacity for the space that I was currently in. And so I had a really great colleague and former supervisor that I was still in touch with, who was also in private practice. And we got lunch one day. We started talking about, our needs for space and where we saw our practices going. And out of that just came this idea, why don't we create our own space for therapists or wellness practitioners to, come to create this like collective community of like-minded individuals and, just do our own thing. So from that lunch, we just made plans. We started looking at real estate, or commercial real estate pieces in the city, in the Buckhead area, and Buckhead Counseling and Wellness was born in a coffee shop in Toco Hill. The rest is history.
I love that, Nicole. There are 2 words that come to mind as I hear you say that: audacity and creativity. Audacity and creativity. So, folks, I don't know if you missed the slight flex in there. Jason, I just I had so many clients that I needed a bigger space. I don't know if you all caught that. That was like really, really subtle. I was doing pretty well. And so it's the audacity, the creativity part is, I love it, Nicole. You said, you know what? Why don't, and this might be a message for many of us out there, instead of waiting or wondering or maybe something never crossing your mind, why not have the creativity, the forethought, the wisdom to, you know what? I'm just going to create it. I'm going to be the one, whether it's you or whether it's via, partnership or licensing or whatever it is, talk to your attorney, your professionals about that, and your tax people. But whatever that looks like, why don't you be the one, right? That's why I like Nicole, the type of thinker that she is. And I say this sincerely, Nicole. I appreciate that you're almost shedding a new light on being an entrepreneur, because when you look at least when most people think about a traditional, and I hate to even say it that way, traditional counselor or therapist, I love how you're not, and not that people are doing this, so don't hear me when I say this, not that you're boxing yourself in, but you always have your eye on how else can I help or serve people. And when you have that type of heart, look at what's possible for what Nicole came up with. And yes, her business grew, and then, okay, well, I kind of always wanted to do this real estate thing. And Nicole, just talk about that process. That thought could have stayed in your mind, right? It could have just lived there. How did that come from the back of your mind to the front of your mind?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it ultimately had, like, looking back on it, and obviously in the moment, it had to be such a God thing, because like literally everything was stacked against us when you put a timeline to it. We signed the lease, a 5-year lease nonetheless, for our space December, the week of Christmas of 2019, right before COVID hit, which is wild. And I remember, like, as COVID hit and they were building out our space, and I remember going over, like, the numbers and the spreadsheet of what it was going to take to keep this business afloat with my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, who's an accountant, and, like, actually freaking out. I had a full-on meltdown in my apartment thinking, how in the heck is this going to work? And it did, right? We're still around to this day. We're halfway through our 5-year lease, and it's truly just like an act of God. And so I think, God gives you the desires of your heart. And I think that he ultimately placed that desire in me to say, like, hey, branch out, try this thing. And I did the thing, and here we are.
That's good, Nicole. So, folks, if you're listening, steps of faith don't stop just because we're in business. A lot of times we talk about steps of faith inside the church, but that's where we assemble and gather and worship together. But the real worship begins Monday through Saturday, right? And so what I love about what you're doing, Nicole, is God is always speaking. Are we listening and then taking action, which is where faith comes in? As the book of James says, faith without works is dead. And I think about Proverbs, Nicole, about how a man's heart is like deep waters, but then men of understanding draw it out. And so I love how the idea, which probably had been there for a little while, and there was probably a beautiful discovery that happened in this process, but it got drawn out, and that's how faith helps us. See, folks, this is why I like talking to Nicole. I always learn something new talking to Nicole. I love that. Now, Nicole, I saw something else in your bio. I saw something else. And I said, now, Nicole did not tell me about this either. So we have the counseling, psychotherapy, and we have coaching. And then, now, folks, if you're listening, if you think about a movie, she kind of foreshadowed a little bit. She used to work, provide support for the divorced couples at the church. And so where I'm getting at, Nicole, is this thing called love. And you have something called Summer of Love connected to the coaching. So what is that, and how do you help people?
Yeah, so great question. I can tell you've been stalking my website, which is totally fine. You're welcome to do that. So Summer of Love. So in my coaching business, I offer a couple ways to work with me, which are slightly unique to my counseling business, or slightly different, I should say, from my counseling business. So in my coaching practice, I offer a container of one-on-one coaching. It's a couple week-long package of just, 1 hour sessions with me, again, to help you crush those goals. But then there's also group coaching as well. And so Summer of Love is a group coaching package. It's primarily geared towards single women who have either maybe been on the sidelines of dating for a little while, or maybe they just recently got out of a relationship, whether that's a short-term or a long-term relationship, and they're getting back out into that dating world. One thing I've realized that I'm really passionate about is helping women find quality partners. And so many people, men and women, struggle to find quality partners. It's actually slightly unbelievable, to be fair. The dating world, I kind of call it the wild, wild west
for
my clients. So Summer of Love is really just, it was birthed out of this desire to help people find what I have found in life, and feel so, grateful and fortunate to have found my husband. And we do that through identifying, what is your strategy for dating? How are you going about it? It's super important to have clear values. What are you looking for? If you're online and you're just swiping right and left on those dating apps for, anybody that looks cute or is in a 5-mile radius of you, that's probably not a great strategy. And it's also certainly not likely aligning with your values. So we've got to figure out that strategy. We've got to identify what your core values are. But then there's some other components too, of training you how to embody self-love and be authentic in who you are, because ultimately we want to be our authentic selves and love ourselves so that we can attract a partner who is also authentic and loves themselves. And then we come together to have this super healthy relationship where we're not dependent on the other person to provide all of our needs, right? We get that from ourselves and obviously from our relationship with Christ. So that's the long version of what Summer of Love is.
Now, people, are you listening? What counselor, therapist, real estate owner do you know that provides this type of service? Like you should at minimum just give her a call just to see what's up, right? I don't know anybody else that is gonna have this wide range. And I'm laughing, Nicole, but I'm always amazed at your uncanny way to help people. That's really what it boils down to, is serving people and helping people. And you literally find, number one, your purpose, your passion, your skill sets. So folks, we can't skip the line on those. Nicole knows those. But you just find unique ways to help people, Nicole. That's what I love.
Oh, thank you.
Secondly, I wanted to talk about the upgrade in your bio. So I said fiance, but congratulations, that has been upgraded to husband. So I wanted to make sure everybody knows it's not fiance, it is husband. So
it's true. Yes.
I was going to say I don't want him to come back and listen and be like, I don't know about him. So
that's fair. No, that's fair. Yeah, that's a wild story in and of itself. I can spare you the details
but definitely,
hear about that.
Definitely congratulations on that.
Thank you.
For sure.
I
Nicole,
appreciate it.
This has been such a wonderful conversation, and you've talked about how God has been involved in the tapestry of your life and business all throughout. Just talk about what was, and I'm sure there were many, but what was a major turning point and your faith?
That's such a good question. I mean, gosh, looking back over my life, there's been just so many turning points in my faith, honestly. And I almost hate to say it this way, but there's been a lot of like tragedy and a lot of heartbreak in my story that, most people don't know about and I don't talk about unless you're, in that inner circle of my life. But I think through all of that, I've been okay. And that's by the grace of God, ultimately, that I'm here today, able and capable of not only being okay myself, but helping other people to be okay in their own lives. So just, really looking back, seeing how God has worked in my life to take me from those really, really dark moments to where I am now. And he's brought me through every single time, even when I thought this may not go very well. He's pulled through, and gosh, I'm just so, so grateful.
I appreciate your transparency, Nicole. What I really got out of that is the promises of God never expire. Like, God controls the outcomes, but you've been to some dark places, and that you said, I'm going to be okay, not because of what the world says. There's, those things are temporal. They're temporary. Right. But knowing that my God has me, and there's a couple things. It's going to be okay. B, if you're not okay, that's okay. And then thirdly, if you're not okay, you can be okay again with our Heavenly Father. See, Nicole, I always get downloads when I talk to you. So get Holy Spirit download. But I don't even know if I can say that again, but I got all of that. Nicole said what she said in like a minute, and that's what I got. You're going to be okay. If you're not okay, that's okay. If you're not okay, you can be okay again. Ooh. Exactly.
Just to do a hot minute of coaching real quick. There was a period in my life a couple of years ago when I was like truly not okay for a hot second. And people would ask me, how are you doing? As people normally do. And I just couldn't look them in the eye and be like, I'm great. I'm fine. Life is fantastic. And so what I kind of started saying to them and ultimately to myself to help coach myself through that period was, I'm actually not okay right now, but I'm going to be okay. And just leaving it at that. And that's really like part of what coaching is about, is retraining our brain to go from this place of like doubting ourselves and all of this negative self-talk and garbage that we feed ourselves on a daily basis, to say, okay, this is our set of circumstances, but what am I going to do with that? And ultimately, I was coaching myself in that moment. I'm not good right now, but I'm going to be. And that was enough.
That's good, Nicole. And I just wanted to clarify, that was hot coaching, but you were preach coaching, which is even better. So I just wanted you to know what was happening. It was like, yes, it was coaching, but I'm like, that'll also preach. So
That's fair. That's fair. We can, 2-for-1 special.
Yes. 2-for-1 special. Well, Nicole, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Folks, if you're listening, email, call, whatever. We're about to get into Nicole's contact information because, like, if I didn't know her, but I do. If I didn't, though, and I just heard all this, there'd be some emails and some phone calls, which brings us, you see, I did a little back to the future. We went back to come present, to go forward to, and you can reach Nicole how?
Yeah, so again, if coaching and therapy are separate, so if you're looking for therapy, you can find me at inneredgecounseling.com. That's my website. It has a link to all of my contact information there. If you're looking for coaching, you can find me at NicoleMCoaching.com or on Instagram at NicoleMCoaching. You can reach out either way for that service.
I love it, Nicole. We are in the backside of 2022. What are you excited about for the rest of the year, Nicole, upcoming for your business ventures? What's next for Nicole Miller?
That's a great question. I actually, I have some things planned, so that's going to be fun. I can tell you a little bit about what's coming up in terms of like events and things like that. But I'm really excited to continue on this coaching journey and, really just expand my reach, as you said, and helping people and serving them. And that's part of, why I started this coaching business, is it just allows me to expand my reach and help more people, which is really what it's all about. So I'm excited for that. But if you want to meet me and do a local event, we have something fun this Sunday. You actually know a couple of these people, I think. An event. It's a half-day wellness retreat with my friend Renee Klein and my other friend Ashley Markowitz. We're going to be doing yoga, some bar, Pilates, and then I'm going to be doing some life coaching. So you can find more information, again, on Instagram at Nicole M Coaching, and find out more there and get some tickets if you'd like as well.
Love it, folks. Nicole Miller, counselor, psychotherapist, life coach. And I have to throw this in there, Nicole, Summer of Love. I have to put that in there. But Nicole, I've had so much fun. And I knew it was going to be fun, but it's still to walk through the actual fun in the moment. We knew this time would come, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your schedule to come on the Jericho Force podcast. I believe people will be blessed by this episode. Hopefully people can, I hope that listeners, I hope you're more encouraged by what you've heard from Nicole. You don't have to have fear. You don't have to go off of what other people have told you about counseling and therapy. We learned what psychotherapy means. So just be encouraged that you have Nicole. There's others like her out there. A bad experience with counseling or coaching or therapy, that doesn't have to be your paradigm. So I hope and pray you can learn from Nicole's life and experience. But Nicole, thank you so much for coming on the Jericho Force podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Jason. It's been an honor and a pleasure, as it always is, when I sit down and chat with you.
Yes, folks, I can tell you this much. Nicole Miller will return to the Jericho Force podcast. That's what you know.
I'll be back.
Well, everybody, that's all
my best Arnold Schwarzenegger voice.
There you go. See, folks, if you can't tell, like we're not like, oh man, she just came on the show. No, we're actual people. Like I know her. We're friends. So if you can't tell, one of my favorite people. But that's all we have time for on the Jericho Force podcast. I hope that you're blessed by this conversation. You know how we leave things here on the Jericho Force podcast. Don't conform to the world's way of doing business. Transform by doing business God's way. We'll see you next time on the Jericho Force podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Jericho Force podcast. You can catch us live on Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and on demand. Check out jerichoforce.com/podcast for more details. To learn how to live out your faith in the marketplace, grab a copy of Jason Davis's book, Fortify, Being Rooted in God's Plan for Work and Business, available on Amazon.
You're listening to Jericho Force Worldwide Podcast.